Hello everyone. Let me just, you're all seeing my screen, right? Let me just open the chat here. Okay, nice. So is everyone hearing me well? Can you see the slides? The people on the back can hear.
You're all good, Carlos. You're all good.
Yes?
We can see and hear you.
Let me just, what? So let's start. I truly hope everyone is safe. For me, it's truly a pleasure to be here and to have a sense of reality with this droidCon online series. I want to thank you all for being here, and I've selected this picture as my first screen because it's how I hope everyone is watching this talk. They are all safe and comfy at home. I decided to wear a suit because why not? The first time I'm doing it. But don't worry, I'm just wearing a shirt and a tie. I'm still on my tracksuits below, so don't worry on that. I'm still comfy. Hello, my name is Carlos Mota. I'm from Portugal, from Coimbra, and I've been developing for Android for the past 9 years. And for the past 1.5, 2 years, I've been playing a lot with Kotlin Multiplatform. You can find me on Twitter at @CFonsMota. I've put the slides there. I usually tweet about Kotlin Android and about photographies and traveling, and now from my living room, so you can only find pictures from home. These slides are also available on the chat, and you can find them on my Twitter or on my speaker deck. I have some code here, so if you want to follow them on the speaker deck, please be free to follow it. So I'm guessing that most of you are Android developers, right? I'm also betting that someone here will also be developing for iOS or even the web or even backend. Probably have people developing for server side. And there is a really cool thing about Kotlin here because you can have Kotlin on all of these platforms. Let's start. I really love this image because I was searching for image with laptops and programming, and I noticed if you look at the bottom corner of this picture that you have a nail and someone is programming PHP. Not sure if related, but let's assume there it is. Let's imagine that we have a wild application idea and we want to develop it for Android and for iOS. So basically, you will hire a team of specialized developers. You're going to define requirements, design mockups for both platforms, and please do this. It's really important that we don't have an Android application look like an iOS application and vice versa. You will need to plan the features development, start development, writing unit tests, and cross-checking validation between both platforms to guarantee that everything is working as expected and you have the same behavior on both platforms. So this roughly also means that you're going to have 2 times the team, the cost, the status meetings required, probably a bit more than 2 times, but who's counting? The time spent on development, the time spent on testing, the time spent on bug fixing. And if we then decided to also develop for the web, we're going to have 3 times the team, the cost, the status meetings required, time spent on development, testing, and bug fixing. So what we really want is to cut this on half. So let's try to find a solution that works on all platforms. And we've been trying it since 2006 when PhoneGap initially appeared. And we've seen a lot of solutions here. We've seen Xamarin, RubyMotion, Ionic, NativeScript. We've seen Kotlin Multiplatform and Flutter more recently. And I'm going to talk a bit about the advantages of cross-platform solutions. And you'll see that I'm not putting Kotlin Multiplatform here because it's not a really cross-platform solution, as you're going to see in further detail in some slides. So typically, if you're doing using a cross-platform framework, you're going to need a smaller team. You don't need to have 2 teams, you just need 1. Typically, it's half the cost of doing it natively, and if your company already has a set of web developers, the small learning curve from coming to the web to mobile using one of these frameworks, it's quite small. Probably if you're using Flutter, it will be a bit higher since Dart is not a really familiar language, at least for now. I'm going to speak also about the disadvantage here. And before I start talking about them, I want to say that these advantages are common disadvantage of doing cross-platform solutions, of using them. But in the end, what matters is what makes sense for your project, for your company. If you have a short budget, if you only have people from the web, it might make sense for you to use one of these platforms. So typically, one of the worst parts of using one of these solutions is that you're chained to the framework implementation of the UI. This means that every time a new OS is launched, and if there is a big redesign on the OS, you'll need to wait for the people from the framework to develop these new widgets, to update them. And I had this problem a few years ago with a Xamarin application that there was a big redesign on iOS, and my application for 5 months still looked like the one with the previous iOS, because the people from Xamarin took some time to update these widgets. And once this update was released, I had to compile the app once again and then submit it to the store. Only at that time my users were able to see the look of a recent update of the new OS. And it's important to mention here that on iOS, when you update from one operating system to the other, the numbers are roughly 80%, so 80 of the users will update to the newest OS on the upcoming week. So all of these users needed to wait 5 months until an update of that version was released. Performance is not the same. Okay, I know there is a huge debatable on this, but it's not. There is some not native components that might need to be written. Sometimes there is no full support on the framework side. In case of Flutter, Dart, it's not a widely used language, at least for now. And a really important point here is that you're committing all your project to one framework and to one language, meaning that if you're doing a project that's going to be developed for the past 10 years, you need to take into account that during those 10 years, the framework needs to exist. Otherwise, what will happen? You will need to migrate your project to the other framework. You will need to develop the framework yourself. These are really risky decisions that you need to take into account before selecting one of these advantages, one of these solutions. So how can we have the best of both worlds? I think you all know the answer now. Kotlin. Every time I talk about Kotlin, I always love to show a small video, so bear with me for the next 30 seconds.
Tyle keczupu Kotlin zmieści się na frytce. Tyle na kanapce. Tyle na burgerku. A tyle na żeberkach. O, a na szaszłyczku jeszcze więcej. Nie ma konserwantów, nie ma ograniczeń. Jesz tyle, ile się zmieści. Kotlin. I love ketchup.
Exactly right. We all love Kotlin, right? Fun fact, now searching for this clip, it takes a while. Kotlin is so popular that you really need to search for Kotlin ketchup to find it. So we all know Kotlin. It was developed by JetBrains. It's open source, it's concise, safe, interoperable, tool-friendly. It's supported and is used by Google. And Google says that everything that they're shipping now for Android in apps, they are doing it on Kotlin. And what some people forget is that it's more than just for Android. You've got Kotlin on server side, you've got Kotlin.js, and you have it native. I could be speaking about Kotlin the entire talk and even more. These are just some of the few features that all of us use daily. We have mutability, null safety, collection, step inference, and a really important one, it's easy to learn. And this is really important on multi-platform, especially if you're targeting mobile, because there is a really small learning curve involved if you're going from Swift or JavaScript into Kotlin and back. Swift and Kotlin are really similar languages. Let's see a quick example. For instance, on Kotlin, if you want to define a variable, we call it a var, a mutable one. If we're going to define a immutable variable field, we call it value. On Swift, it's the exact same thing, but instead of val, we're going to use let. If you now go to functions, on Kotlin, we call it fun because we have fun. I bet no one ever made this joke. On Swift, we call it func. There are also a few differences. In string interpolation, you use the $sign in Kotlin. On Swift, you use the slash with parentheses, and when the return type, use 2 points, while on Swift, use the arrow. Creating an object, accessing that methods on that object, it's the exact same thing. So let's talk about Kotlin Multiplatform and what is Kotlin Multiplatform. So it's when you use Kotlin in projects that target more than one platform, right? Easy. Let's see this example. We want to develop an application for Android, for iOS, for the web, and a desktop. So typically, our application will have a presentation layer. We'll also have the model, the parser, the network, and then we're going to implement the views. How can we interact with those presentation and with all the options? And then we're going to do the exact same thing for iOS, for the web, and for the desktop. And there is a part, what we are going to call the business logic, that we are doing over and over and over again. What you're going to change, it's the libraries that you're using. So what we really want to do here is just to merge everything and use a common model that will allow our views to access all this information. So Kotlin Multiplatform, it's not focused on sharing the entire code, it's focused on sharing the logic, the application logic, and leave the UI to the native implementation. So you're going to still do your UI on Kotlin in case of Android and on Swift in case of iOS. There are a lot of advantage on using Kotlin multi-platform. First, you're doing it on Kotlin. Also, there is a really low risk here. You can decide what you're going to share across all platforms. You can start by sharing tests, for instance. You can start by sharing your network, your database, an image processing library. You can decide what it's worth to share. And as you see that it's working on our project, you can increment this and share even more models. So you decide which risk you want to take on this approach. It's interoperable, and you have really consistency across platforms. So you're designing and developing this shared model, and you're going to use all your business logic in all the platforms. So this means that all the platforms will behave the same way. Also, and a really important point here, you have a really strong community support. The Kotlin Lang Slack is amazing. I've asked there hundreds of questions, and typically in 1 or 2 hours, I have an answer to my problem and I can move on coding other features. So I'm guessing that you're all like really excited, right? Yeah. So let's see how can we communicate. So if you're developing a C++ library, for instance, that could also be used to share code across different projects. On most of these libraries, typically what people do is having if-else throughout the code. If you need something from your platform, from iOS, you're going to use this. If it's from Android, you're going to use that. And this is typically how most of those libraries work. Kotlin multi-platform, it's way different, and it works really, really cool. So how can we expect to communicate and to access platform-specific values? The answer is quite simple. We use the keyword expect declared on a common model, and then we use the keyword actual when we want to define something that is platform-specific. Let's see an example. We want a platform-specific value for a name. For instance, we have an application, and we want on Android to say hello Android, and we want on iOS to see hello iOS. So this name needs to be platform specific. So what we're going to do is to use that keyword expect, and if you look at the top bottom corner of the screen, you see that this is being defined on a model called common main. All your shared code is going to be on common main. So I'm expecting that someone will say what name is. So if I'm targeting Android and iOS, I need to define actual on both of these platforms. So I'm going to use here, and if you look once again to the bottom of the screen, you will see that I'm using Android main to define the name for this field on Android, which will be Android, and in iOS, I'm going to define name as iOS. If you look at the IDE, what we're going to write, expect object, the IDE already does everything for us. So we're targeting Android and iOS, and you'll automatically say, okay, you're targeting these platforms and you don't have this defined, so just press Alt Enter and it automatically create everything for you. when you try to create your first project on multi-platform, sometimes it's not as direct as one might expect. You have to make some changes. I've written and updated that blog post, so if you can find it on my Medium, you still have to make a few changes, but you can have a project running in no time. There is also a collection of code and tools designed by JetBrains and TouchLab that helps you start with your first project. It's called CampKit, and it's an excellent starting point. You can find all these links on my last slide, so you can start coding multi-platform in no time. So I've been talking about multi-platform. Now let's see a demo application and some code. So ready. This is a project that I've done for droidCon Madrid to present this use case there. It's a conference application. So you can find this on my GitHub, Mota/droidCon Madrid. And you can find the project here. So as I was mentioned, you've got Android main, common main, iOS main. And we're going to see the dispatchers. This needs to be the platform specific. So I will need to define this on the Android and iOS. So if you go to Android main, you'll see that I've defined them here. And now we can navigate to the iOS main to see them defined on the iOS side. As you can see, everything is inside IntelliJ. I also needed to define HTTP client, a database engine, and everything once again is defined on iOS main and Android main. For database, I'm using SQLite, so I needed to write a SQL instructions. And then I have my common Android code, all the Android libraries that I'm using on Android main. So this is an activity, and here is a fragment containing the favorites or the favorite talks. So I only needed to implement the UI on Android because it's just using this common model, and it's fairly simple. I have a recycler view. I'm searching for my talk for myself. I believe I'm going to like my own talk because why not? And then I'm accessing the list of speakers. I'm using Glide to retrieve the speaker's image, and I have information about the venue. You're already familiar with the build folder. Now, when you generate the framework that's going to be used by iOS, it will also have a bin/iOS folder. This framework is going to be imported on the Xcode, or you can use AppCode if you want, and it will contain your command model. Okay, you're going to access the command model through this framework. Once again, you can keep programming in iOS using Swift and using all the libraries that we are already familiar with. Here, I'm also using CocoaPods that was easier to allow me to manage my dependencies, and I only needed to implement here the UI. I'm also going to like my own talk. It's worth to mention that I'm no iOS developer, so if you're looking at this code and if it's something on Swift it's not quite as it should be, please be free to make a merge request that I will accept it in no time, so don't worry there. So the project is really simple. I have a recycler view in Android, a white table view control on iOS. I'm making multiple network requests to Sessionize API. I parse these response objects, I sort them locally, as well as the favorite talks. And then I notify the UI when there's new content available to be drawn, and I reload the list. So typically, these are the libraries that you're going to use on Android, on iOS if you're doing everything native. So use Room for Database, and you use Core Data, use Retrofit, Alarmfire, Gaze, and JSON serialization, RxJava, RxSwift. And the big difference here is that you're going to use activities on Android and UI table view and UI view controller and UI table view in case of iOS. So there is an unnecessary duplication of code. All your business logic could be just done once and imported for both platforms. So instead of using Home and Core Data, you could use SQLite, Ktor, Kotlin serialization, coroutines, and tests. So this is a really high level diagram of this application. So I'm using, once again, Ktor for my network requests and SQLite for the database. I'm going to use my model of objects, and then I will have get, schedule, and speakers to access these upper layers, and then we're going to define this platform-specific HTTP client, SQL driver, and dispatcher. This is the code that will depend on the platform itself, and then the views, the activities are going to be done on Android and then on iOS. So let's start by seeing the code. Once again, this is all available on my GitHub, so feel free to check them there. We're going to define this on the shared model, so we're going to use the command main for this. This is where all your shared code is. So we're going to receive an engine, this HTTP client engine that will be defined on platform specific, and we're going to see this on a couple of slides. And we have a URL for the Sessionize API. So what we're going to do is just create our HTTP client and make a get to that URL. We're going to use Kotlin X serializer just to parse this response, this JSON response, and have a list of speakers, a list of objects that contain all the information related with speakers. If you're already familiar with Android, that I'm guessing that almost all of you are, this is already what we used to do on retrofit. So we've got a response here. We have the fields for ID, first name, last name, full name, etc. We just create a class, speaker entity, and use the annotation serializable, and then we'll receive this list when we make the request. This data will then be stored on a database. I'm going to use SQLite for this. You'll need to write the instruction, and SQLite works a bit different from most libraries, so you need to write the SQL code. And what will happen next is that they will compile this instruction and generate the code that we're going to see here. That is, this insert or replace speaker will automatically be created by the SQLite. Still on the command main, I'm going to create just a simple speaker DAO to access this data. You'll see that I receive a speaker object. I'm just going to use the ID to identify the speaker itself, but then I'm just going to add it as a JSON object, as a string on the database to keep things simple, and create a get all speakers just to retrieve the list of speakers. We're also going to simplify the speaker object because having a speaker entity has a lot of information that we don't need. So we're just going to create a speaker that has just 6-7 fields that contains all the information that I need to show this information on the UI. So let's see these get speakers and how this works. So I'm going to receive here an API, a Sessionize API, and a DAO that is going to store this data on my database. So as the first code that we saw, we had a fetch speakers, right? So we're going to call the Sessionize API.fetch speakers, and we'll receive the result here. After this, we're going to have these speaker entities that we received and to map them to the speaker object and insert them on my data access object, on my database. If this operation success, we're going to just call on success. If it fails, we're going to call on failure. Now let's reach the presenter class. I'm going to create here a method called attachView. I could have called any other name. I call it attachView because I was going to call it on create or on view did load in case of iOS. And we're going to receive an interface here. This interface is iSpeakers data. It's how we're going to communicate with the UI. So when you call attachView, you need to send this interface. This interface is really simple. I'm going to have just two methods. On speakers data fetch that contains the list of speakers, and on speakers data file just to notify that it wasn't possible to receive the speakers. Once I receive this view, I'm going to call fetch speakers list, and that on success and the one failure method that I've shown you before, it's just going to call this view on speakers data fetch or view dot on speakers data file in case this operation fails. Going to the service locator, you'll see that we have a get speakers presenter. So this is the method that's going to be called from the UI, from the presenter on the UI side. And what it's going to do is just to initialize the Sessionize API in speaker DAO via these get speakers. And now if you look at these two, Sessionize and speaker DAO, you'll see that they access the platform service locator. Typically, we use the keyword platform when you want to access something that is platform specific. In this case, the HTTP client engine and the database engine. So are you all with me, right? So I told you before, in order to have something that is defined by the platform itself, you need to use the expect and then the actual on Android main and the on iOS main. So on our common model, we're going to say that we expect someone will define what HTTP client and database engine is. So if you're saying this, we need to define this on the Android. So on Android main, I'm going to say that I'm going to use for the HTTP client engine, OK HTTP. And for the database engine, it's going to use Android SQL driver. And on iOS main, it's going to use iOS create and native SQL driver. So I say that I expect someone that will define this. And once again, on Android main and on iOS main, I say that, okay, actually, this value means this. Now that we have everything defined, we can now go to the UI part, and let's go to Common Android and access that service location .get speakers. So once we access this method, we can call attach view that, as we saw before, it will trigger the fetch speakers. And once this data is available on speakers data fetch, it's called automatically with a list of speakers. We'll then populate the recycler view with our adapter, and we can still keep using everything that you're already familiar with. You can keep using our libraries. You're doing things native as you're already familiar with. Now, if you go to the iOS part, we go to iOS app. We do the exact same thing. We call the presenter attach view, receive the list of speakers, and then we update our views with this list of speakers. So I'm guessing the big question that we have is how much sharing should we do on multi-platform? Honestly, it's what makes sense on your app. Some quick conclusions. This slide is from last Kotlin Conf, because this question on how much it's worth sharing, we've seen it a couple of times, and it depends a lot on your application. For instance, JetBrains announced its space, and they say that it was full Kotlin multi-platform. Everything is done on Kotlin multi-platform. Cash App, for instance, decided that they are only sharing their business logic. Yandex Maps is sharing their business logic. Wrappers for C++ libraries. Planboard is sharing business logic, networking, offline caching layers. So it's what keeps sense on your application that you should share. It's also worth to mention that all of these applications are already on production. So although multi-platform is still on its experimental state, still in experimental phase, we start to see several projects on production. Since it's still in the experimental state, this means that sometimes you update a library and you break one of your builds. This is especially true when you want to also target, for instance, the web. I had a couple of projects that I was testing to see how could I have everything with web and desktop, and every time I made an update in one library, I usually ended up breaking the web part. Once again, the community is really, really good, and you ask on Kotlin Slack what I was doing wrong, and they're more than fast to answer to your questions. A small advice, start small. Don't try to reach 100% of shared logic. This is really important. Don't start to move everything to Kotlin multi-platform. Don't stop creating features just to move everything for multi-platform for the next 6 months. Start small, see how your team is going to adapt. Your team is going to change if you have things on multi-platform. You need to take care of the iOS team. Start one model at a time. Start by network, database, image processing, small modules that will give you extra confidence to continue moving things to multi-platform. I mentioned iOS team because, well, from their side, this means that you're going to start to have code that was typically on Swift, to start having that on a common model, on the framework that they are going to import. From my experience, people on the iOS side, they didn't saw any problem with that, because they could focus on just doing front end and not caring about what was happening on the back end, let's say. Also, it's worth to mention that using Kotlin multi-platform still means that they are going to do the UI using Swift, and if you're using Flutter, this stops. So it's also a good approach on convincing them to multi-platform instead of other cross-platform solutions. We had a big problem when you're programming for iOS 1.5 years ago, because it was really tricky and it was almost impossible to debug it from the iOS side. Fortunately, the people from TouchLab created a plugin that to allow you just this. And during the last Kotlin Conf, official support was mentioned that it's going to be released somewhere this year. Some final conclusions. Once again, the community is really, really strong. It's growing a lot. A lot of people are already using Kotlin. A lot of people are starting to use Kotlin multi-platform. Google and JetBrains are pushing Kotlin. It's 2 times faster to develop your features business logic, 2 times faster writing unit tests. And the biggest point here, it's one tech stack. You've got consistency across platforms. Being said, it's also important to mention that if you put a bug, you have a bug on both platforms. But a really cool thing here, and let's see the cup as half full. If you fix a bug, we're going to fix a bug on both platforms. So here we go. A couple of libraries, really good libraries that are out there. Tor, Kotlin X, coroutines, serialization, SQLite, multi-platform settings. Hello, Russell. He's going to speak afterward, and he was one of the authors of multi-platform settings. And we've got Stately. I've got here also some links of some cool projects to follow. Once again, you can just access these links. The slides are already available. Some more useful information. You've got the Kotlin Slack, the Kotlin official. You have a lot of talks from Jake Ward. You have the people from TouchLab. They're also writing, and they released a book, if I'm not mistaken, a few days ago. It's really, really good. And of course, you have all the Kotlin Conf videos. So thank you for assisting to my talk. Let's see how many questions do you have now.
Great. So excellent job, Carlos. We're always we're always trying to improve our attendee speaker feedback. So version 1.0 was the Bravo app where you can get the clap. So now we're going to introduce let's see here, version 2 of our interaction. Let me see if I can get that over here. Let's see here. Hold on, before we start with the questions, I gotta do this one here.
Okay, let me just see.
Okay.
Okay, I'm here.
Can you see now the screen? This is a representative audience.
Full room, nice. Oh, thank you. I can now finally take my jacket and my tie. This was a really bad decision.
And I more clapping. So, and I also have to say, the outfit did get a shout out from my guy Nicola Corti. Gave you a 1+ on the outfit choice today. Haven't seen Nicola since droidCon Lisbon 2019, but anyway, so you did get a shout out on the outfit as well. So
thank you.
Anyway, so great job here. Let me get Uli here back up online so that we can show the questions, and the time is yours on the questions.
Okay, let's start by a difficult question. When it's going to be ready for production? Well, I would say that probably still going to have it experimental another year. They're making a lot of good improvements. It was released, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday or 2 days ago, version M2 version for Kotlin that have a lot of improvements on multi-platforms, especially for the second question, that is when Kotlin coroutines supports multi-threading on iOS. According to the issue on the GitHub, it should be available on this next Kotlin release that happens 2 days ago. So answering both questions, so I'm hopefully it's going to be ready after 1 year, but let's see. They launched Spaces, which is full Kotlin multi-platform, so it's almost there, I would say. And support for multi-threading. Let's see this new version, because I believe that they are going to have this support now. So is Kotlin multi-platform ready to go to production apps? Yes, we already have a couple of apps on production. Cache App as the business logic, Index Map as business logic, and a few more things. And there are available libraries available for netcalls. Yes, we have Ktor that's already available. I've been using it, so I've made a switch from Retrofit to Ktor, but it's available and it's working pretty good. So how about dependency injection? So I think there are already some dependency injections libraries that work. For instance, if I'm not mistaken, Kotlin works, and you can use it. And I think there is a new one called injection. I haven't used this one, but I read a blog post and it looked pretty good. What are the benefits of using expect actual versus plain interfaces? Well, you can do a lot of things with expect actual. You can use construction, you can have methods, you can do everything, almost everything that you want, that you were limited in using interfaces. Can you use Room with multi-platform? Well, you can use it on the Android side only. You can't use it on the multi-platform side, so you'll need to use SQLite, for instance. Is there a reason why you use MVP, or is it possible to use MVVM as well? It's possible to use MVVM as well. Yes, I used MVP more because I'm more used to it, to be honest. What are the cons of using Kotlin multi-platform? Well, the first one, it's experimental. The second one, since it's experimental, well, it's still being developed. For instance, suspend functions. It's going to be available only now for iOS, so it's still a work in progress. What's your experience with shared code in terms of instrumented UI tests on Android iOS? I've only done unit tests on multi-platform, so I cannot really answer to this question. I'm going to make some tests and I will reply in a tweet on the upcoming days, I promise. With Kotlin multi-platform, is there a need to obfuscate code for more sensitive apps? Yes. Well, your code still needs to be obfuscated, but you can still use ProGuard for that. And in case of iOS, if I'm not mistaken, it will be assembled, so there's no need to obfuscate because the platform already does that for you. Can you detail how to set up the common Kotlin model in Xcode? Yes. So I have a blog post about this on Medium. It has all the details there, along with some screenshots. Basically, what you do is from your IntelliJ, you're going to have a method where the framework is going to be generated. You compile the project, and under build/iOS/bin, you're going to have the framework there, a debug framework and a release framework. From your Xcode side, you just need to import this framework and use it as you would use any other framework. So, okay, sorry. Is it possible to move Android resources to Kotlin multi-platform? I believe, I would say that no, but honestly, I haven't tested this, so it might there be any solution that I'm not aware of. Can we adopt the Kotlin multi-platform gradually, model by model, into an existing massive app? Yes, and please do that way. Don't start to do everything on multi-platform for the next 6 months. Don't try to do it. So start small. Start on small models and see how it is going to evolve. Is there going to be any support from Firebase Firestore for Kotlin multi-platform? I would say yes, probably on the upcoming months. How does interaction between an iOS framework important for Kotlin multi-platform using C interop CocoaPods plugin original framework in Xcode work? I would say that the behavior it would be practically the same. It's I honestly only use the framework imported by myself. I haven't tried to use it on a CocoaPods, but I would say that it's the same behavior. It's a framework that you can just import. It should be quite similar. How often did you face an issue with campaign? Honestly, to solve an issue with Kotlin multi-platform, I usually don't go to Stack Overflow. I go to Kotlin Slack. It works way faster, and typically probably 50% of the times by just searching for my error, someone has it. Also, not only the Kotlin Linux Slack, but if you go to the GitHub and you search for an issue, most of the times someone already asked that question. So most of the times you also have a workaround. Would it be possible to call async code from multi-platform mode without callbacks in a routines way, but from iOS? Well, it's going to be possible. It's not quite possible now. There are a few workarounds, but there is still no final solution. Hopefully, after this latest release, it's going to be possible to do it. How can we?
Carlos, let's take
Yes.
one more question, Carlos. Okay. We'll take one more.
Do you have any concerns about App Store rejections? Honest, I don't have. Usually what happens is when you have on App Store, the people from Apple don't like if you have any reference to Android, but having a framework that you're just going to import, I don't see any problem with that. It's also worth to mention that this already happens when you have C++ libraries. So if Apple has never, at least that I'm aware, rejected one of application because you're using a C++ library, it's not going to use it on a multi-platform project. At least it's what I'm expecting.
Great, Carlos. Thanks so much for being with us here today. It was really fantastic. It was good to see you. Thanks for joining us. You looked great too. The suit was a huge hit, as we know. This is fantastic.